Good evening. The father of a man killed during the Birmingham riots has called for a public inquiry into the conduct of the police investigation after a report by the police watchdog found the case had been mishandled.
Tariq Jahan, who is credited by many with diffusing tensions in the city after his son and 2 others were killed, said today that he had lost all faith in the justice system.
He described the actions of West Midlands police surrounding the deaths as a complete shambles and says he now feels his call for calm that night has been rewarded with a slap in the face. Andy Bevan reports.
Champagne celebrations in July 2012 for 8 men cleared of the murder of 3 friends during the Birmingham riots of 2011. Tariq Jahan and brothers Shahzad Ali and Abdul Musafir died after being hit by a car outside a petrol station on Dudley Road in Winson Green. They'd been with a large group of men defending local businesses in the wake of previous unrest. Despite losing his son that night, Tariq Jahan's father Tariq appealed for calm and was credited with stopping any escalation of violence.
Brothers, what I have to say for you here is go home, read your namaz, say some dua for the 3 guys, for the 3 brothers. Yeah?
A year later, 8 men were cleared of the men's murder. During their trial, the judge said that West Midlands Police Senior Investigating Officer, Detective Chief Inspector Anthony Tagg, had lied to the court, and although he allowed the trial to continue, the jury was instructed to disregard his testimony. A few days after the deaths, the police met with several young men whom they thought might be potential eyewitnesses. But when they met, the men told them they didn't really want to give evidence because they feared they themselves might be prosecuted for things they might have done during the riots. The meeting took place here at this mosque not far from where the men died. And the young men later told the IPCC investigation that during that meeting they were offered immunity from prosecution by a man that they said was DCI Anthony Tagg. But police officers who were at this meeting told the IPCC investigation that DCI Tagg was never at that meeting, and the men must be mistaken, concluded the IPCC. In fact, that offer had been made by Detective Inspector Tariq Jahan, an officer with 30 years on the force. He wasn't authorised to make such deals, but later told the trial he understood his boss, DCI Tagg, had agreed to it. DCI Tagg denied this to the trial judge. The IPCC was called in to investigate, and today it released its report, calling Tariq Jahan's actions reckless. He's since retired from the force. The report exonerates DCI Tagg from any gross misconduct, but recommends that he be subject to management intervention.
The remit of the IPCC was to investigate the 2 police officers concerned, which we have done. And as you will be aware, we have found that one of the police officers would have had a case to answer for gross misconduct had he still been serving with the force. And we found some failings, although not at a level of misconduct for the other officer.
This morning, Tariq Jahan and members of the other victims' family said today's report had left them with absolutely no faith in the justice system.
We call upon the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police and the CPS to provide us with answers to the questions that this report raises and the concerns of the families. I believe that a public inquiry into the actions of the police and the CPS in this case should be ordered by the Home Secretary, Theresa May.
Well, we'll hear more from Tariq Jahan in a moment. But first, Andy Bevan has been speaking to West Midlands Police Assistant Chief Constable Gary Cann about the conclusions reached by the IPCC.
One of your officers has been described in today's IPCC report as reckless. How does that make you feel?
Well, the actions of Detective Inspector Tariq Jahan were indeed described as reckless insofar as it relates to his offer of immunity to people, and he had no business making that offer. He's not entitled to do that. No police officer is entitled to do that. That's clearly a mistake, and it doesn't feel very good to have to acknowledge that. However, I think when you make mistakes, the only thing that you can do is acknowledge them, and that's exactly what the force did as soon as we became aware of the situation.
Do you also accept the report's findings that DCI Anthony Tagg was lacking in his responsibilities?
Well, the report covers the actions of DCI Tagg by saying firstly that he didn't set out to deceive anyone. Indeed, he didn't deceive anyone. He didn't lie, and he hasn't set out to conceal anything. We do accept the findings of the report. We also accept that there's some learning there in that he could have expressed some of the things he communicated around the immunity issue. He could have expressed them with more clarity, and potentially that would have given prosecuting counsel a better chance to grasp the full implications of what was being said. We do accept that.
But the lack of communication and exchange of information could have completely derailed this trial. What does that say about the standard of care that your officers are taking?
Well, if the mistake that was made was sufficient to have prejudiced the trial and meant that the jury wasn't capable of reaching a fair, balanced and just verdict, then I've got no doubt the judge would have stopped the trial. He didn't do that.
Now, several officers were interviewed by the IPCC in the course of this investigation, many of whom were at the meeting at the mosque where this so-called offer of immunity may or may not have been made. And yet only one officer, now retired, seems to have been singled out for criticism. He's being called a scapegoat. What would you say to that?
In order to be subject to police misconduct proceedings, of course you have to be a police officer. Ex-DI Kiani isn't a police officer. He retired in October 2012. The date of his retirement was always going to be October 2012. It was always scheduled to occur then. He didn't have any choice in that matter. It was just the application of the rules as they were applied at the time.
The families of the men who died, what's your message to them now we've had this latest development?
There's nothing I can do or say that's going to change.
Do you want to apologise to them?
We made a mistake. We've let them down in that regard. But the mistake we made wasn't sufficient to cause the trial to have to stop. It was still able to go to a jury, and it did. So the effect of that mistake was not to prejudice the ability of the jury to come to a verdict. It did go to the jury, and the verdict of that jury was that the men were not guilty. Having said that, there's some learning for us. We've acknowledged that. We take that on board. We've put that into practice, and we'll move on hopefully stronger than we were before.
Just ask you again, do you want to apologise to the families?
We've learnt from the mistake that we clearly made. We've let them down. I'm sorry and sad that they're left feeling that they've had no justice. For my part, again, I would have to say, and we'd have to all be clear, that the case did go to a jury, but I'm very sad and sorry for the way they're left feeling.
That's Assistant Chief Constable Gary Khan. Well, joining us now is Tariq Jahan. Tariq, you've just heard the police say they are sad and sorry that you're left feeling the way you do. What's your response to that?
It doesn't really resolve the issue for us. How many times have we heard it before? You know, we're sorry, and we'll look into it. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again. But how many times have we heard that before? And once again, family lives are destroyed. I'm not happy. I'm disappointed, and I've lost my faith in the judicial system.
So, where do you take it now?
Well, first of all, I've got to go back and speak with our legal representatives and have a look at the options. But you know, if nothing else, maybe a public inquiry or a judicial inquiry, whatever we can achieve. If that doesn't help, then maybe even looking at European courts to see if we can get some justice from them. But until I've spoken to the legal side, I'm not really sure.
Tariq, you mentioned that family lives are destroyed, and your family has certainly been through the mill since, sadly, your son was killed. Can you give us an idea of the sort of things you have to cope with?
There's so much. I drive past my son's grave nearly every day. I've moved from where I lived previously. I've moved to West Bromwich, and I drive past the grave every day, and I speak to him every day. You know, I say a few words to him every day. But family, my son, Tahir, who shared everything with his brother. They slept in the same room. They ate together. They boxed together. They went out together. They even worked together at the same place. And he finds it incredibly difficult to carry on without having his younger brother, who he felt that he didn't protect at that time. He feels guilty, and having to try and calm him down. He's one of the
biggest chaps you'll ever see, and he's one of the most humblest people you'll ever see. Heart of gold, but he's got a lot of anger inside him because he listened to his father, who said, you know, we're going to wait for justice, we're going to let the system deal with this, and we don't want no anger or resentment. And he feels that, I think he feels that his father hasn't done enough. He's struggling, but he is coming to terms with it. He is learning to accept it. It's just a lot more difficult for a young man to deal with it than it is for myself.
Very briefly, are you concerned that as a result of what we've all heard today, there could be further tensions in the community?
No, absolutely not. You know, the community have been really strong. They've shown some fantastic support to the families, and 2.5 years on now, we haven't heard anything of that nature in the community. Nothing's happened, you know, no violence, nothing. And I've got the utmost respect for the community. They've done such a wonderful job in composing themselves and keeping themselves calm. And it's not just a particular community, it's all the communities put together. Winson Green is a multicultural community, and everywhere I go, people, you know, stop me in the streets and say, you did a wonderful thing.
Well, that indeed is a blessing. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Other news, and Birmingham